Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jarrod. This is sort of an emergency podcast in light of some of the developments in the conflict in the Middle East, or rather, how the conflict in the Middle East is playing out in academia today. And there are a few things that I would like to discuss involving it before we get to the core issue, which is another document produced by the so-called Elephant Group, as I will call them for the moment, since I don't really have another name for them. But by the end of this episode, I think they will be known as the Shmendriks Group, which is something they fully deserve. There have been a lot of statements that have been issued over the past week, both by university administrators and by Jewish studies programs. Now, it has been heartening to see that quite a few university administrators, presidents, and chancellors have been issuing unabashedly pro-Israel statements. I will add that so did the President of the United States. Joe Biden's speech was really one of the most impressive speeches about Israel I have heard from a president in a very, very long time. Perhaps since the Clinton administration, and to be perfectly honest with you, I don't remember Clinton ever issuing a good speech about the Middle East.
I do have some criticisms of Biden's speech, though, but we can maybe get into that later.
Okay, yeah, we'll leave that aside.
All right.
But the point is, his speech is far better than what we've heard come out of Jewish studies lately. Out of all the statements, okay, first of all, I should point out that there's been silence for most Jewish studies programs. Now, look, if there's nothing really going on your campus, there's no Students for Justice in Palestine, perhaps it's better not to say anything. You know, that's a point that's open to debate. But at schools like Michigan and Harvard, where there has been unabashed pro-Palestinian support framed in such a way where it, for all intents and purposes, justifies Hamas's actions, Jewish studies has remained completely silent on the matter. Harvard, we issued a statement, including Harvard in there for this, and it does turn out that Derek Pensler, the director of Jewish studies at Harvard, did issue a statement of support for Israel initially after the terror attack happened. But then you had these 35 clubs issue really one of the most offensive statements I've ever seen in my life, condemning Israel, to the point where Harvard faculty issued a statement, a very, very heartening statement, where hundreds and hundreds, I haven't checked the last count, of faculty across the university signed it in support of Israel and in condemnation of what the club said, and also about the lackluster statement the either president or chancellor of Harvard originally had given. Now, great, I was so happy. Then I tried to look to see how many people from Jewish studies signed, and a total of 4 out of 25. As of Tuesday, I haven't gone back and looked, signed it. And to me, that's utterly unacceptable. They were presented with a statement. They didn't even have to write one, and all they had to do was put their names on it. What offended me perhaps more than anything else, perhaps because it's my affiliate institution, or technically I'm an affiliate of them at UNC Wilmington, but the flagship campus in the Carolina system issued an utterly horrendous statement that basically said, we mourn for the loss of life in the current upsurge, quote, upsurge of violence in the Middle East. I don't even know what that means. There could have been an earthquake in Jordan, for all I know, based on what's that, and some factions started, scrambling for resources and started killing each other. But there's nothing, Israel's not mentioned, Hamas is not mentioned. And they have an SJP problem on their campus. There was a massive demonstration the next day, and I heard that someone did throw a bottle at a glass bottle at a police officer. So, violence is very much looming. I was so angry about it that I emailed the entire Jewish studies program at the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies, people I've worked with in the past, expressing sheer disappointment at their utter lack of ethics and responsibility to the Jewish community that they allegedly speak to. So it's been very depressing on that front. Those are my 2 cents about that, and maybe Adam has something to add. I didn't introduce ourselves, but I hope you all know us by this point. There's no need to keep introducing ourselves, saying hi, Larry, hi, I'm Larry, Daryl, and Daryl. This is my brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl, every time we walk into a room, but we could do it if that's what our audience wants. And anyway, Daryl, Adam. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Adam, this is our guest David Bernstein, and this is our other guest David Bernstein.
Yeah, so we've done this bit already. Okay.
Yeah, that's for our next podcast. And speaking of that podcast that we will be putting up, one thing I did say in it, sort of in a slight defense of some of these really milquetoast statements that we're seeing being issued by university administrations, is that they're afraid, right? They're afraid of division on their campuses. They know that this is a radioactive topic. If you say that this is a heinous crime against Jews, and that's all you leave it with, then you have not only the Arab sector, but also the woke sector rising up and very angry that their side of the story is not being addressed by the administration. So the administrations just want to keep this as neutral as possible they want to say something without actually saying something.
Well, if you read the statement by the chancellor of Chapel Hill, which really puts the Jewish studies program more to shame, his opening paragraph is an outright condemnation of Hamas and Israel's right to defend itself. And then he goes on and says, we really hope for, peace and a just settlement for the conflict in the Middle East. And I think that's entirely reasonable. I mean, after all, the Arab-Israeli conflict is a conflict that's been going on for 75 plus years. And we can't sit here and saying, but this group started this, and this group started that, and this group started this. And it's an ethno-national conflict where there are two people who are claiming the same chunk of territory. Who is more in the right as well? You have to take an entire course to really learn about that. It's not something that you can answer. But at this very moment, there is just no question that an organization as bad as Al-Qaeda and perhaps ISIS went and committed the largest mass murder of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. And that warrants condemnation in and of itself, without having to get into debate.
That so much of the world is celebrating the murder of Jews as a moral good.
Yeah, no, that's awful.
Protests in London yesterday celebrating the murder of Jews.
And I'm more outraged that Jewish studies isn't speaking out against that than what's going on in the Middle East. They have an ethical responsibility to say something about people celebrating the murder of Jews, and they don't do it. They will not open their mouths, right? So even if they're condemning Hamas and then they're giving all their howevers, that has nothing to do with what's going on here. Call out SJP for what they are. Please do. They're a terrorist supporting organization. They have made that clear with everything that they have said. And now they're trying to put it into action on college campuses. And enough is enough with that. So
in fact, now Jewish groups, not academic, but community organizations, Jewish community organizations that are urging administrations to drop their SJP chapters from their campuses.
Good. And donors should threaten to pull money. And I think that's ultimately, as we said in our recorded, but to be posted later podcast with David Bernstein, that at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to money. It's all about money and optics, and donors should get their act together. I mean, there are a lot of Jewish donors at universities, without descending into any stereotypes here. And I think many of them tend to the conservative side, or to the, should I say, the pro-Israel side, and they should hold, the universities, to the fire, under the fire, whatever the hell that expression is, and make it abundantly clear that we're not going to fund a campus that is going to allow anti-Semitism to flourish while the mass murder of Jews is transpiring, and there are threats of more violence against Jews. It's that simple.
I think they're afraid, though, that there's going to be more violence in response to that action against organizations like SJP.
Who's afraid, the donors or the university admin?
Universities.
Yeah, okay, but who cares?
The donors, part of it, but money's not all of it.
It's a lot of it. Okay, if they lose their money, if they lose their donors, if they lose their football field, what do they got left? It's money and optics, and the optics are never on the Jews' side. That's been firmly established. It's been established for a very, very long time. Jews don't count, and we know that. So Jewish studies, and I hate to be repeating myself on this, but they keep repeating themselves, and they seem to be better organized than we are. So they keep at it. They keep.
How are they so organized? That's a question I have. We haven't looked at this statement yet that we're going to discuss, but one question that I want to mull over with you is, how are they able to get so many signatures in like 2 days? If we were with JSCN going to issue a statement, it would take us like a week at least. Yeah. And even then we wouldn't get it to get this many signatures.
Well, quite possibly a lot of them are sitting at R1 institutions. They have tenure already. They don't have to work very hard. They're teaching maybe one class a semester, and no one's bothering them to produce anything else. They've got nothing better to do. A lot of academics who work at the top universities have way too much time on their hands. And there are a lot of militant ideologues in their group. And
yeah, well, they're able to mobilize so fast, and their signers are not concerned about being on the same list with people that they dislike. Our side needs to stop that, right? Everyone who agrees with the statement should sign the statement, regardless of who else may be on the list that you may have some sort of personal animosity with. The other side doesn't do that.
Yeah.
The other side is not afraid to get political, and I think a lot of our people on our side are afraid to get political. They want to stay as kind of neutral academics, and but this is not the time for that.
I agree. And especially speaking to your first point, I have approached a couple of friends who I know are on our side who consider me their friend. And, one of them said, well, you're too aggressive on social media. You get into all these fights. Yeah, I'm fighting for the good here. And if I don't get a little aggressive about it, then we will get nowhere. So they don't want to sign. Someone else said to me, well, there are a lot of people who signed your statement that I don't really like. Okay. I don't like a lot of the people who signed your statements. What do you mean? We're Jews. We don't necessarily like each other, but we have to. Like and I'm just joking. I don't mean to offend my signatories. You're all lovely people, and we deeply, deeply appreciate your support. We just wish you would circulate our statements a little bit more. But yes, no, the other side, this is what ideologues do. And, the left, people always think the right's better organized than the left, but they're really not.
No, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, Nazism is the great exception. And so people always look to Nazism to show that. I mean, Mussolini, on the other hand, was very good at getting people organized, because his fascism was very, I hate to use the word in conjunction with the word fascism, but it was inclusive. He didn't include many of the divisive racial issues that virtually every other authoritarian government did. Let me be clear that Mussolini was racist, and he certainly went after and murdered North Africans. But he said, whatever, Jews, okay, maybe I don't like them, but if they want to join fascist movement and support me, that's all that counts. But the left has historically been far better organized. That's why the Bolsheviks came to power in the Soviet Union, and not some sort of right-wing group in support of Tsarism or some sort of proto-fascist entity. And I think the same thing
organized on the left, that there could be some issue that mobilizes them tomorrow, and they already have the signs printed out.
Yeah,
we're all ready for it.
Yeah. Without getting into a debate about American politics, it does also appear the right's better organized, because the GOP seems to fall into line with whoever seems to be leading the pact.
What?
They did so under Trump. Okay, nobody questioned him. And they
have you been following the speaker's election? Have you been following anything going on?
I'm not talking about this moment. I'm talking about when the dust settles and it's clear that their constituents are willing to go along.
Fell in line with under Trump, it's true, but Trump was a very unique situation. They had all kinds of.
Adam, I have to correct you. There are no degrees of uniqueness. It's just either unique or not unique. Okay, my advisor, who was a native Russian speaker, pointed that out to me in my dissertation, and I've never made that mistake since.
Okay, all right. Let's get back to this particular topic, though. Let's analyze this this statement that has just been released by the Elephant Group, for lack of.
And I'm going to turn on screen share now, and hopefully I've gotten better at doing this since our initial launch. And here we go. Do you see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, before we get into the current statement, I just want to remind people about the original elephant in the room statement, for which we didn't issue a counter statement, but I did write a very widely circulated op-ed in the Jewish Journal, which has a large readership base. But this was the statement issued in August, I believe, which essentially, the majority of it was a condemnation of the current Israeli government and the direction that it's headed in. And in and of itself, the initial portion was not an anti-Zionist or an anti-Semitic document. Yes, it clearly is choosing sides. It's referring to apartheid and whatnot, but they also make clear in this statement, and it's written somewhere in here, one state, two states, or in some other political framework, right? Okay, so they're making it clear that they accept a two-state solution. Okay, now I'm willing to talk to almost anyone who's willing to accept a two-state solution, because that means Jews have the right to ethno-national self-determination in their ancestral homeland. But this statement then went on to use the loaded term Jewish supremacism, which we have decided, or at least I have decided, and everyone who supports me has decided, is really off the table, because it's a neo-Nazi trope. It's a Nazi trope. and it should never, ever be used, even if you're talking about just what's going on in the West Bank. It also implicates Jews in white supremacy, because that's what people think about today when they hear about supremacy. And indeed, that's what the left does. They do try to implicate Jews as hyper-white people complicit in white supremacy. And of course, the other problem was American Jewish billionaires help support the Israeli far right. So when you say this right after you say Jewish supremacism, you're back at the Rothschilds, right? You're back at a cabal of international Jews who are propping up Jewish issues or a Jewish entity. Obviously, in the 19th century, it wasn't Israel because it didn't exist. But Israel has become whatever the elders of Zion were in the 19th century.
But these same people think that any criticism of George Soros is anti-Semitic.
Yes, and I wrote this specifically in my op-ed that if you're going to call out George Soros' globalism as being anti-Semitic, then you have to admit that this is anti-Semitic as well. There's just no way around it. I mean, at least with George Soros' globalism, and let me be clear.
I don't even consider criticism of George Soros' globalism to be anti-Semitic. But if you're going to say that, then it seems to stand to reason that this is.
I do consider it anti-Semitic when it's articulated the way it is by people knowing full well that there are white supremacists and neo-Nazis who are watching it and who are going to take it in that way. If they
that is a topic for another podcast.
Yeah. But I have no problem with people criticizing George Soros. I have no problem with people attacking him.
We can talk about that later because we have different views on it.
Okay. So yeah. Let's okay. So
can I also ask a question? What 8-year-old is drawing this art?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
And the other one on the news statement is even worse.
Okay, well let's pull up the news statement now. So we know who these people are. This statement look at that. Look at that. I think they bottomed out at 2844. Okay, congratulations, Rosemary Nash, graduate student at the University of Glasgow. I guess you were the last and final one. But I know hundreds of people or who they are on this list, and I know dozens and dozens personally. We're not going to get into that, but just to show you the power and how quickly they got this around. And let's be clear that even though this was a Jewish studies authored document, a large percentage, I'd say the majority of signatories are not in Jewish studies and have no connection to Jewish studies whatsoever, and really should not be voicing an opinion on this matter in this particular context. So Lior Sternfeld seems to be the moving power behind this at Penn State University, and I'm not afraid to call out their Jewish studies program as being particularly problematic. They have people there who are propagating extreme anti-Zionist narratives and willing to do anything to get them across. Another person from there whose name will come up.
By the way, I know I've met Lior Sternfeld. We hosted him here in Youngstown a few years ago. He seemed like a nice guy, but I don't like what his activism is here.
It's awful. I've heard his research isn't particularly good, but that's not my area of expertise, so I won't comment. Here is where is him? Tamir Sorek. He seems to be behind this project. He's also at Penn State. It was on his Facebook page that he issued a call for speakers to volunteer to propagate this statement at synagogues right before the high holidays. So he wanted someone to get up there and give a Yom Kippur sermon about evil American Jewish billionaires. The sad thing is, if there are any synagogues in the United States where that would go over well, then Judaism has a problem today. So again, it's Penn State that seems to be the key force behind this, near as I can tell. I've seen no evidence to suggest otherwise. Okay, well, the elephant didn't go away, and they issued a new statement of. It looks like the same piece of art.
No. There's another piece of art on the new one.
Oh, is this not the new one that I'm on?
This is not the new one. You haven't.
I have two windows of the old one here. Okay, that's not good.
Yeah.
All right.
So go to on the right, on the left there. There's the three. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right.
See, look at this art is even worse.
Yeah, it looks like someone, tried to.
It looks like somebody doodled on a napkin while they were on the telephone, waiting for, to get in to speak to their insurance company or something.
It looks like perhaps, the screamer in Edvard Munch, after he screamed and he was done screaming, he wasn't quite sure what to do with himself, coupled with a Holocaust monument. They kind of threw that together, and the 3-year-olds produced this and thought that somehow this would be the key to ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well done, people. That said, people did sign it. Now, this statement is incredibly problematic, and we are going to take the trouble to read it and dissect it, because I think everyone needs to know what it says. Also, if we look at the people involved, clearly Dr. Omer Bartov is one of the key movers and shakers here, and this really saddens me, because this is one of the great Holocaust historians. He's truly, of the Christopher Browning, Jeffrey Herf generation of scholars whose works are, I'll put him up there with Saul Friedlander and other such people, Yehuda Bauer. Their works are foundational for studying the Holocaust, and it makes me really sad. So, okay, the opening line, end the violence, release the hostages. That's a throwaway line. It doesn't really mean much. You don't know what to expect. But here is the opening paragraph, and I'll read it. We, the undersigned, condemn Hamas for its heinous crimes against humanity. These terrorists, who slaughtered hundreds of civilians, men, women, children, babies, and seniors in the most horrific manner and kidnapped scores of others, must be brought to justice. Israel has every right to defend itself and to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found.
Now, when I first read that, I'm thinking, okay, this seems promising. In fact, this is a statement I might even sign.
Yeah, if that was it, I'd sign it, no problem. My one criticism is it doesn't use the word Jew anywhere, even though I know Hamas murdered non-Jews and they're more than happy to murder non-Jews. But, they do have to recognize
that it says Israel has every right to defend itself and to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found is sufficient for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not going to criticize them over that. I would sign it. I wouldn't think twice about it. I'm not going to nitpick about it.
But then you read on.
Yeah, and again, this is how people read today. And, maybe this explains why some of these signers who I wouldn't have thought would fall into this camp ended up signing it. I'm someone who skims, especially in this internet age. I read this paragraph and then I moved on to the signatories. And I said, wow, maybe these people are coming around. Maybe it was because of our network, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe they finally developed some moral conscience here. But then we start to read the various points. And let's read these and analyze them against the backdrop of this opening paragraph. Imagine that you're a lawyer for a second and someone submits this to you as some sort of contract that your company is going to issue or whatnot. 1, do everything in its power to rescue the hostages. Okay, so far so good. Israel holds vast numbers of Palestinians in prisons, many of them elderly. Israel must seek an exchange of prisoners in order to save its own and other countries' captives, citizens from certain death. Now, we could debate whether it is morally sound to release Palestinian terrorists in order to get Israelis back. There is certainly an argument to be made on both sides. I tended to think that, maybe a prisoner exchange would be a good idea. But then last night I read that the Hamas operator who was responsible for this, okay, so the blood of 1,300 people, 1,300 Jews is on his hands, he was one of the people released in exchange for Gilad Shalit, an Israeli who was being held by Hamas. So because Israel released this guy, they had the brains behind the operation who was going to produce and execute the mass murder of 1,300 Jews.
So it's ridiculous on that level for that reason, and I'm against the prisoner exchange idea, but it's also incredibly naive to think that Hamas will in fact release terrorists. Like they will go for this idea of a negotiated prisoner exchange in this case, like they have in the past. But what leads the signers of this document to think that for the Hamas side, that releasing the hostages is even on the table?
Well, they did say initially that if you release every Palestinian in an Israeli jail, and I think that's about 5,200 people, they'd be willing to release all the hostages. Now, the problem here, aside from the numerical disbalance, but Israel has traded hundreds of people just to get corpses back.
They traded hundreds of people just to get a short video of Gilad Shalit at one point, or a button off of his uniform.
Yeah, so there's just no way. Was Gilad Shalit returned alive, or was he
alive?
Okay. So there's just no way that Hamas would release every single prisoner. They're obviously going to hold some back because that's the only leverage that they have, right? And also in terms of the optics, it certainly helps them because they'll say, "Hey, Israel is bombing us, and we've got innocent Israeli civilians among us." But leaving all that aside, this first paragraph still doesn't negate the opening paragraph, right? It doesn't contradict what's written in here. Nowhere does it say in the first paragraph that a prisoner exchange is not acceptable. They could exchange prisoners and then go.
Well, it contradicts it only in the sense that, okay, it says, and to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found. A lot of those prisoners that are in Israeli prisons murdered innocent Israeli civilians.
Oh yeah, there's no question here. There's no moral equivalency. They're asking the return of terrorists for people who are civilians. I mean, yes, I imagine some of the people captured were IDF soldiers, but there were, elderly, women and whatnot. And the way they justify it, and again, I heard a Hamas spokesman on the radio.
Babies.
They said on the radio, the Hamas, these are legitimate targets because they're settlers. They call anyone in Israel proper to be a settler, which should dispel any idea that Hamas is willing to accept a two-state solution. Their 1988 covenant, which calls for the extermination of the Jews, is still very much on the table.
And who's pushing the narrative that these are settlers? A lot of people in Jewish studies when they call this settler colonialism.
Absolutely. Anyone who refers to Tel Aviv as settler colonialism is essentially an anti-Zionist who believes that 1948 is a racist endeavor. They're making it sound no different from Britain's takeover of India, or, they're not afraid to deploy this, the conquest of North America and the death of, 90% of Native Americans.
Well, let's move on then. We could agree that this first point is not that contradictory. Like
exactly.
In and of itself, it's okay. I wouldn't sign a statement that says that personally, but I would not begrudge anyone for supporting that.
Well, thus far, if it had ended with point one, I'd probably still sign. Okay, but I'm gonna look at the exit point for me here too. Number two, refrain from punishing collectively Gazan civilians for the crimes against Hamas. One massacre does not justify another. This will only lead to more devastation, fueling the cycle of violence. We call for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. Now, before we get to this last sentence, the first part is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, it's incredibly naive. Right? I mean, it flies in the face of reality that this is a violent, brutal war, and Israel is not deliberately killing civilians, right? They're not. It's just not.
Israel takes more care to avoid killing civilians in a combat zone than any other country.
It also denies the reality that Hamas deliberately inserts itself into civilians, into civilian communities, uses human shields.
Of course, yeah, right.
Yeah. There's no way to eliminate Hamas without killing civilians. It's impossible.
Yeah, if they didn't do that, Israel would have a much easier time doing what they need to do.
Absolutely.
But they put everything in schools and hospitals, and the Hamas soldiers themselves, call them soldiers, whatever you call them. They're in tunnels. They're hiding in tunnels. So where do you
They're embedded in the Associated Press. I found it so amusing when they bombed the Associated Press's office in Gaza a few years ago. They had it coming. They deserved it for renting office space from Hamas. That means they're funding terrorism if they do that. Okay, now here we get to the major problem. We call for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. Now, someone, perhaps somebody smarter than me, though I do have a PhD from Berkeley, but I am Canadian, so maybe that's those two negate each other. No offense to my fellow Canadians, I'm just playing into American stereotypes. We call for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. Let's go back to the opening paragraph here. Israel has every right to defend itself and to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found. Okay, well, these murderers are in Gaza. We know that. So how do you have an immediate ceasefire if Israel has the right to pursue these murderers wherever they can be found? Can you explain that?
I can't. It's a direct contradiction.
It's an outright direct contradiction. And if these are university professors. If I were in class, a student, and a professor said this, I would hold them to the fire and say, how in the world do these two things square with each other? Or it's a document that I would assign. I would assign it in a logic class and ask the students to try to square this circle. They can't. 3, end the violent oppression of Palestinian people. Okay, whatever that means. Apartheid, the West Bank's decades-long occupation, keeping Gaza's 2 million Palestinians under siege for 16 years, erasing the memory of the Nakba, now all contribute to the brutalization and violence. They must be urgently brought to an end. There is no other way out. You see problems here?
Well, I don't know if this necessarily contradicts the first point, the opening paragraph, but it's completely wrong. I mean, it's a tremendously problematic. It's not an apartheid. It's not a violent oppression.
Is it pronounced apartheid or apartheid?
I don't know. I don't care.
Right.
And it's not an occupation. Gaza is an independent entity now. They're not a state. They could apply for statehood if they wanted to, but it's not under occupation. There is a blockade on two sides, but I wouldn't call it an occupation. And the blockade would not be happening if Hamas wasn't in power there and didn't have it in their covenant that they intend to kill every Jew behind every rock and tree. What do they expect Israel to do when the party in power has that particular mission? And erasing the memory of the Nakba?
How does Israel do that? In what ways has Israel erased the memory of the Nakba?
First of all, who has forgotten the Nakba? That's all that you hear about.
These lefties walk around the streets going, Nakba, Nakba, Nakba.
Right.
Our favorite political scientist, it's all she ever talks about, Nakba, Nakba, Nakba.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, but there is something that does contradict and negate the first paragraph.
All right.
Keeping Gaza's 2 million Palestinians under siege. Okay, granted it says for 16 years, but again, if you're going to pursue the murderers wherever they can be found, I would think that a siege would be necessary for the process while this is unfolding, no?
Maybe. I don't see it as a direct problem.
Okay, I guess I'm not up on the military, terminology and logistics as much, but it does sound like it might be a bit of a problem. I mean, after all, if they don't keep the siege going, at least for now, what's to stop more Hamas militants from crossing the border and committing another operation?
Well, I mean, you could let civilians out somehow.
To where?
Well, I don't know, into Egypt, if there's some kind of a deal made with the Egyptian government to get civilians out.
You can let people out during a siege. That's not impossible. I mean, you could let civilians out. People have been able to get in and out of Gaza for the past 17 years. It's not impossible. Okay, so the key problem here then is point number 2, right? I mean, which is an outright contradiction. Yes, the rest of it is an anti-Zionist, anti-Israel. There's only one, justifiable side in this conflict. So in a very general sense, it negates the first paragraph. But this one's an outright negation. It's an outright contradiction. And there's absolutely no way to square this. How do you do this? How do you possibly justify this? And I don't have an answer. Do you?
No, it's also tremendously naive. So not only is this document completely illogical, right, because it contradicts the opening statement, it's tremendously naive. I mean, these people, a lot of these people, such as the said political scientists that we both know, have PhDs in international relations, and they must understand how world politics works.
Yeah, she has signed the statements. Okay.
All right. Well, we weren't going to name this person, but
we're naming people in this document.
We're naming people in this document, right? Yeah. So, I mean, anyone that studied international relations and foreign policy and strategic studies in any way can't possibly be that naive that to think that that Israel can actually defend itself and pursue these murderers wherever they're found without some innocent blood spilled, given what is, especially given that Hamas, uses civilians as human shields.
So
even if they didn't, it's impossible to avoid targeting civilians entirely.
Yeah. Now, okay, we've already established that these people are naive. We've known this for years already, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a given that the woke Hamas alliance does propagate naive statements. But how do we explain the fact that they deliberately inserted such a contradiction? How do we explain the fact that they had this opening paragraph, which is not something they would under any other circumstances issue without pages of qualifiers?
Well, I don't know. Either they're morons, right, that don't even realize what they're doing, or they're very well calculated and they're thinking that some people are going to read that opening statement and either not read what comes after, or at least pay more attention to that opening statement and say, all right, well, I'm going to sign this, or this seems like a balanced document, so I'm going to sign it because it's moderate, right? That might be what they're thinking.
I do agree that they're morons and Shmendriks and twerps,
right.
But at the same time, the utter contradiction here, I mean, it crosses the line beyond naivete into, duplicity.
They did the same thing in the first document, in the elephant in the room statement.
You think?
Well, I don't think that they were as directly contradictory of statements said within the same document like this one is, but they definitely made an attempt to make the document palatable for as large an array of people as possible in academia.
Absolutely. But let me put a little bit.
That's what they're doing here. But they're giving with their left hand what they're taking away with their right hand. And they're very good at this.
But the difference with the first document is that I think genuinely that a lot of the signatories, saw that first thing and say, okay, this is against Bibi's government. And we need to, I hate Bibi. I'm not quoting myself here, though I don't like him. But, then therefore this is legitimate. We're not targeting Israel. But then the authors deliberately, for an English-speaking audience in the West, inserted the anti-Semitic tropes. They knew that the anti-Semitism would play well among certain segments. It would trigger something within them. And at the same time, the first document, half of the document, would be palatable to people who are not anti-Zionists, but who genuinely want to see, if they could, out of power, or at least Bibi removed, and progress to move forward on some sort of solution to the conflict. So it is duplicitous in that sense, but it's trafficking, but it doesn't negate itself, and it's trafficking in anti-Semitism. This one I wouldn't call anti-Semitic necessarily, though, point number 3 is certainly heading in that direction. But you don't have the anti-Semitic tropes in it like the other document does. This is just duplicitous because of its inherent contradiction. It's something written by a two-bit huckster, shyster lawyer in the late 19th century, getting you to, go into the carnival or to buy his circus freak show that he's trying to sell so he can, pack up and leave and move to Botswana or somewhere. And it's really very unethical, in my opinion, for a group of professors to author a document like this, because they are deliberately tricking people into signing it. I mean, that's
and you know what? I think that these people are such morons that you could actually have anti-Semitic tropes in this document if they did do that and still get a lot.
Oh, absolutely. That goes. We've seen time and time again that these hundreds of people, or in the last case thousands, will sign stuff with anti-Semitic tropes. Now, something, and I doubt they did this deliberately, but this document actually reinforces an anti-Semitic trope to any non-Jew who's going to read it. There is a stereotype that Jews are all shifty. They're all clever. That's why they all become lawyers, because they know how to, sell you snake oil or, the Twin Towers the day after 9/11, right? They're saying one thing out of their mouth, but they're really saying something else. And that's what this document is doing. We're standing with Israel, but on the other hand, we're not. Okay. So, someone, and I'm not saying the left are going to read this and interpret it that, because, they're all for this shit, except for the ones who are angry about the first paragraph. But, someone who is like on the political right who dislikes Jews, assuming they actually read this crap, and I'm not convinced that they do, but they would read this and say, look what these shifty Jews are doing, right? They're engaged in linguistic manipulation as per practice going back hundreds of years, which is the stereotype, one of the, longest stereotypes of Jews in the modern world, right? Shifty shysters who are duplicitous and tricking people into going along with what they're saying, when in reality, they're speaking out of the other side of their mouth. So I don't think they actually intended that, but to me, that is one of the upshots of this document, and it makes us look horrible. Now, I'm looking at some of the signatories here.
Wait a minute, we didn't look at the last paragraph.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. We must refrain from using our grief and shock to justify revenge and create more civilian bloodshed. We call upon the Israeli leadership, Palestinian leaders, the United States government, the international community, and all peace-seeking people around the world to work together for a swift end to the current violence and toward a true and just peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
You know, the naivete is so maddening. I don't understand how grown adults can really believe this. It's like after 9/11 when you had people saying, well, you know, kids need to put their toy guns away, you know, and we need to be peaceful with each other and not hit back, not retaliate. Like, what? That's not how the world works. So, you know,
it reminds me of Michael Moore, that jackass, his movie Fahrenheit 9/11. Did you see it?
Yeah, years ago. Yeah,
that was so utterly offensive. The way he presented, you know, 9/11 and the aftermath as a product of a history of American violence and slavery. Somehow it had to do with slavery. You know, that explains for hatred. It made no sense unless I'm mixing some of his movies up and conflating.
Do these people really believe that if Israel would just pull away, right, from Gaza, right, that everything will be hunky-dory the next day? Like, what happens the day after Israel does everything that they're demanding? What happens then?
Well, Hamas comes back in and slaughters 2,500 Jews this time.
Well, you know that, and I know that, and I think any sane person knows that. But how crazy do you have to be to believe otherwise?
You know, I mean, Omer Bartov, one of the top Holocaust historians, apparently does. I'm not sure what to say to him, even though he wrote, you know, this fantastic micro-history a few years ago about the massacre of Jews in one Ukrainian village. I don't know what to say. Now, you know, I mean, this is just pure naivete. You know, let's hold hands and everything will be wonderful. But who are these Palestinian leaders they're referring to exactly?
I don't know. Are they talking about the PA?
I guess so, but the PA has zero credibility at this point. I mean, their people hate them, so why would they let the PA speak on their behalf? They haven't held elections in 17 years, probably out of fear that Hamas or Islamic Jihad this time would win. And moreover, I mean, their leader is an outright anti-Semite. Time and time again, he's gone to the UN and basically said, you know, Jews have no ties to the Holy Land. The Holocaust had nothing to do, he said nothing to do with religion, which is actually ironically true. It was about race. But, you know, said it was, because Jews seem to have made too much money in Germany, so that's why Hitler wanted to kill them all.
Wasn't a PhD dissertation very anti-Semitic as well?
Yes, yes. At the most polite way of putting it, it was about, I think, Israel's exploitation of the Holocaust. Now, obviously, you know, there is exploitation of collective memory. Everybody does that. But it goes far and beyond that, right? I mean, Peter Novick's wonderful book, The Holocaust in American Life, you know, does have sections on, you know, the exploitation of Holocaust memory. But then, was it Norman Finkelstein? I think he also wrote one, The Holocaust Industry.
Yeah.
And even Peter Novick denounced that one as being utterly inflammatory. There's ways of broaching the topic of how collective memory is exploited without really saying that, you know, the Holocaust is nothing but an industry and, you know, fabrication of the way things are commemorated in order to justify the conquering of another people. So, yeah, and I would have to question any PhD dissertation that was produced and signed off by, quote, scholars in the USSR before perestroika. In and of itself, those are a problem. Okay, so we've established that this
go back to that. So all peace-seeking people around the world, you know, people that want the Israeli government wants peace, right? That's why they have to eliminate Hamas. If you want peace, you have to eliminate warmongers. That's the only way to have peace in the world.
Yeah, of course, I agree with you 100%.
The naivete behind this statement is so maddening. That's the part that really gets me. I feel like banging my head against the wall when I read things like this.
You know, one person, this activist, her name is Jeanette Friedman, she posted this on her wall, and I think she's a Shaul Magid disciple. But I posted a legitimate, okay, I said, this is easily the most unethical statement authored by a Jew since Bernie Madoff's attorney's closing arguments.
Yeah.
But you know, I wrote, whatever your politics, do you not see how every enumerated point negates the opening paragraph? Israel has every right to defend itself and pursue the murderers, but they can't invade Gaza, and they need to urgently end the siege. How exactly do you pursue terrorists if you end the siege? I wrote, sorry, this is sheer dishonesty, blah, 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 everything we've said here. I didn't call anyone a moron. But
I am. I'm calling them morons.
No, I know. So am I. I didn't call them that on their wall because I wanted my point to be absorbed here. And this was how she wrote back. Revenge is for God. Oh, I forgot. You think you are God and you know everything, and your bloodlust is glatt kosher. You reek of hatred. You want babies murdered. You want innocent people who pray for peace dead. You have no idea how horrible Hamas is to them. Hamas is the issue, not the people. Yes, they have followers, and so do pigs like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Okay, let's forget the end part. But where have I justified, wanting babies murdered?
I saw that exchange.
I mean, like, what the fuck? Why can't I, charge this person with libel? I mean, this is absurd. I have never advocated the deliberate killing of civilians in my life. Okay, I have not done that.
Nor have I.
Yeah, so this is just really not fair to be attacked.
I would go so far to return to my other point and bring it back to what you're saying now. You and I are far more peace-seeking than any of the people on this list.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely. Yeah, that we want to see Gaza invaded by Israel, if you want to call it an invasion, and bring Hamas to its knees and destroy them. I'm sorry, but that is in the interest of peace. It's not in the interest of revenge. I mean, calling this revenge is absurd. If Israel were to go house to house and start beheading babies, yes, that would be revenge. But Israel has no intention of doing that. They're not going to do that. Now, when Hamas takes a baby and uses it as a human shield and is standing there with a Kalashnikov behind the baby, pointing at an IDF soldier, and the baby ends up dying, that is not a lust for the blood of babies. It's simply not, right? At the end of the day, you have to defend yourself. And when 1,300 Jews get murdered, you have to defend yourself. But apparently all these people, many of them leading scholars in Jewish studies, and this list is going to just increase. We're up to 470. Let's refresh the screen. Maybe the numbers increased. No, they're still at 470. They're taking a snooze and they're not updating the names at the moment, but they will go up. And see, this saddens me too. James Young, he's written what I would consider the best book ever produced on Holocaust memory and monuments. It's just, and I'm assigning it next semester, and it saddens me. It saddens me to see some of the names that are on this.
I'm happy to know that I don't know. I haven't heard of most of these people.
Yeah, well, I know you're in poli sci. I think there's some political scientists who signed it, but these are prominent. I'm well within the milieu of Jewish studies, or at least I was at one point in my life. So I recognize dozens of the names on here, and I know a handful personally. But this is not stopping. I mean, it's just some of them I expected from, but others, I really don't. I won't name a name here, but we have a former signatory from our mission statement who withdrew his signature because, quote, "This isn't the way I want to fight for Israel." Okay, what was I supposed to say? But I assume that meant he would still fight for Israel. Yet he chose to sign this document. If he signed this document and he was still a signatory, I would have to send him a message saying, what the hell? I mean, you do not support our mission statement anymore if you actually signed this document. So it's really, I mean, you just look at the names here. I mean, again, I haven't heard of a large, Peter Gordon is a very prominent intellectual historian who I would not call a Jewish historian. He's affiliated with Harvard, look at that. Yeah, he's affiliated with Harvard's Jewish Studies program. But I went to graduate school with him, actually. So yeah, this is
one person there that I have once met like 25 years ago. But
Van Greenstein, he's called me a racist and whatnot several times. Yeah, in public. Yeah, that's their favorite charge. Call someone a racist, a baby killer, and you've shut the conversation down. No, this is just God. This is just terrible. Yeah, and it's going to get worse. More and more people are going to be signing this. Dmitry Shumsky, I think I actually peer-reviewed something he wrote once, and said publish it. So it's, yeah, no, this is not good. To put it. Oh, Jeanette Friedman, she signed it. She's a rabbi. The one who just called me a baby killer. The opening, by the way, going back to that statement, her opening remark was "Revenge is for God," And then she goes on about, being peaceful. I'm trying to figure out, and I asked her this on the wall, so who is this God that you're speaking of? And if it's a God of vengeance and you're a peaceful person, why exactly would you believe in a God of vengeance? Another, outright contradiction. Her theology doesn't really make much sense here. Yeah, well, we could go through these names endlessly, but there's really, no point in doing that. We know who these people are at this point.
Go back down again here.
Oh my God, Deborah Dwork signed it. Ugh.
We'll go back down a little bit. No, I thought I saw it. Never mind. Okay.
Oh, look who signed it. Sasha Senderovich. That's a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I saw Leora Halperin signed it too.
Well, I'm not surprised about that. I mean, that's a given. She's the one who sparked that whole controversy at the University of Washington a number of years ago. So anyways, our job here is not to out people. This list is for everyone to see. And,
I mean, we're not outing anybody because they put their own names on the document.
Yeah, yeah. And I declare here that these people are all Shmendriks, and a handful of them are twerps and morons. I mean, I'm going to call it for what it is. These are people who, if they genuinely believe what they wrote above, are not capable of producing quality scholarship, or they're willing to let that go. Perhaps their brain is divided into two, and they're willing, in certain circumstances, to forsake the, I think, ethical obligation that they took on when they became scholars. And it's going to do nothing but harm us in the diaspora. Because as we all know, and as a friend of mine, a person in Jewish studies, fairly high-ranking, if you will, who's on our side, said yesterday, these statements have absolutely zero impact on events in the Middle East, and he's 100% right about that. But ultimately, these events harm the Jews in the United States and the diaspora, because they play into what the anti-Semitic left wants to hear, and Jews are signing off on it. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible, and it's inexcusable. So I'm not sure if there's anything else left to say about it at this point. I'm going to turn off screen share. And here we are, back on the screen. Look how fluidly that went compared to our first podcast. Boy, we're really making great headway on here. You got a flag, we both got haircuts. We know how to use technology. Yeah, this is turning into one hell of a podcast.
Yeah.
Do we have anything left to say here?
Let us know in the YouTube comments, for those watching, what you think about this document.
Yeah, please
and
do.
Our analysis and our insights on it. Do you agree?
We will post a link to this document in the comments as well, so you'll have easy access to it. Though, if you are involved in the Jewish universe, you've undoubtedly seen this document by now. And I suspect the absence of some of the usual suspects on this document is simply because yesterday was Shabbat, and a lot of them, go offline on Shabbat. I suspect that by tomorrow they will have signed it. And this is only going to get worse, because the fighting is going to get worse. It's not going to end. Israel is not going to lay down its arms and say, let's give peace a chance. They're going to presumably go into Gaza in the very near future. And if the anti-Israel rhetoric is so high before there has been a ground invasion, right? I mean, what has Israel done at this point except take out targets with aerial bombardment? That's all they've done. I mean, if the animosity is this high at this point, then I fear for what future weeks hold. I fear for Jews on college campuses who are easily identifiable. I mean, not every Jew can hide. And, I don't know what's going to be. It's just going to get worse and worse. On that happy note, happy Sunday, everybody. It is 11:54 in the morning on Sunday, October 15th.
It's probably a much nicer day there in Wilmington than it is in Youngstown.
It is currently 66 degrees, which I suppose for the middle of October would be considered nice.
Well, here in Youngstown, it's a very dreary day, and it's well, actually, it's only 51 degrees, but I would have thought it was a little bit lower than that.
Do you get snow in Youngstown? Does it snow there?
Yeah, quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we get snow every 2 years, just a little bit. But anyways, in my opinion, if I can't jump in my pool, my outdoor pool, I don't personally have an outdoor pool. I'm not one of those, wealthy.
If you had one,
people.
No.
Yeah. But no, I mean, our complex has a pool. Yeah,
Okay.
Under 80, I can't go in. So yeah, so it's not a perfect day, but it is nice. Maybe I'll go for a bike right now. In any case, we intend to have this emergency session. We had recorded another podcast on Friday, episode 6. So this is going to take precedent over that one, given the immediacy of the
So
situation.
this could be what, episode 5.5 or something like that?
Five and a third, or 5.33 and a third, like the Naked
Okay.
Gun.
The Naked Gun movies, yeah.
5-point emergency, 5-point Shmendrik. We'll figure it out before I have
Yeah.
it. Yeah, but it's definitely going to go up. And I urge you people who are watching us, who are on our side, to do something, to mobilize people that you may know. I urge you, if you are someone in Jewish studies and you haven't signed your statement, please get on board. I mean, even if you don't like me, and as Jerry Seinfeld's mother said, how can anyone not like me? But yeah, there are people who don't like me. I accept that. But this is
remember
really not
that
about me.
I'm more likable than Jarrod. So pretend that you're working with me rather than Jarrod if you don't like Jarrod.
Well, you are technically one of the co-founders of the network, so they are working with you. Okay?
Right, of course, but think of it that way, right? Too many people are thinking of it as working with Jarrod Tanny, right? But it's a whole network of people. Some of us are more likable than Jarrod. So, think of it in that sense, right? So I want you to join and sign your name. And I would really be very helpful is for those, especially who are already signatories, to share our statements and our podcasts with your social media groups.
Yeah, please do. Because
Please,
we need to,
really,
if we're not mobilized like the left is, we're not going to win this.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the only way. So join us in the struggle. The struggle goes on. The force will be with us. Do you have any other cliches to throw in?
Live long and prosper.
See, I can't even do that with my fingers. Okay, that's another reason to go with Adam rather than me right there. All right, plus he has that nifty flag in the back. All right, well, this is Jarrod Tanny and Adam Fuller signing off on this emergency broadcast that we have made today, with pleas to our followers to really put a stop to what Jewish Studies is doing in our name. And we will see you again very soon. Our upcoming podcast that will be posted, Save Another Emergency podcast, will be with David Bernstein from the Jewish Institute of Liberal Values and the author of Woke Anti-Semitism.